Welcome to the Orange County Department of Education webcast on video games and education. My name is Mike Guerena.
And I'm Mark Wagner. We both work in the Educational Technology Unit here, and we've got an exciting program for you today.
For the last 30 years, video games have been an important part of our youth and popular culture. Right now, they're a bigger industry than either the movies or popular music. There's no doubt that players are deeply engaged with what they're doing when they're playing video games. Anyone who's ever watched a 10-year-old play a game can tell you this.
Computer and video games also show a great deal of potential as teaching and learning tools. They can provide a context for learning, opportunities for inquiry, and frameworks for collaboration. They're also deeply motivating and engaging for today's students. More importantly, players are learning difficult-to-teach 21st century skills, such as adaptability, self-direction, risk-taking, interactive communication, prioritizing, planning, and managing for results. There's little doubt that a good deal of incidental learning is taking place when students play these games, but the question is how we can harness this powerful new media for intentional learning in formal education.
Our program today focuses on the use of video games in K-12 classroom environments. We'll be hearing from Dr. Henry Jenkins from MIT Media Lab, Dr. James G., author of What Video Games Have to Teach Us About Learning and Literacy, and Clark Aldrich, author of Simulations and the Future of Learning and Learning by Doing.
Video games have been used in the classroom in the past. In the late 80s and early 90s, games were targeted and designed mainly for early learning applications. Games like Reader Rabbit and Math Blaster emphasized skill-based learning.
Through the work of organizations like the Education Arcade, gaming is starting to reach a much broader audience. The efforts of this organization has made it possible for games to move beyond kill and drill applications to more authentic and experiential learning. The potential is great.
I think that what we're looking at is a technology which allows people to drill deep into subject matter, to explore choice and consequence, to play with complex variables, to simulate real-world processes, to create peer-to-peer teaching opportunities, to create an immersive and highly motivated mode of learning. And all of that, I think, is enormously valuable in the context of the K-12 classroom.
It's so much more interactive with the students. You're so much more likely to remember and take away things by interacting with the product and playing on your own terms.
And the great thing about video game technology is it puts people in a world where they can see how language connects to actions, to images, and to talk. So they don't get just words for words, they get images and actions and dialogue for words, and then they know what they really mean in context, and they know how to use those words to problem solve and to think about problem solutions.
And I think the answer, if you are a teacher today, or if one is a teacher today and has to do that, I think there is an opportunity to leverage a bunch of the existing computer games. It's going to be suboptimal, and you have to sort of appreciate how that experience is suboptimal. But there are a lot of computer games out there that are better than nothing. And I think something like Civilization or The Sims or whatever often comes to mind as being quite good, not perfect, not highly transferable skills, but fairly good intellectual fodder. And one of the great skills, and this is again I think for anyone who's a teacher today, it is really hard to use a simulation or a computer game in a classroom. It's not the same skill set that we have when we're lecturing or when we're creating tests or even doing things like labs. And so one of the great, next generation teaching skills, I believe, is, take something like Civilization and just try to deploy it in the classroom.
If you think of a game like Full Spectrum Warrior or SWAT 4, if you play the game SWAT 4, which is about a SWAT team, you have to live and play by the rules of a SWAT team. You actually can't kill anybody very easily because you have to warn them and try to take their gun away. You can't just shoot them. You have to go into rooms and do things according to the professional practice of the SWAT team. So there, all the knowledge you gain about a SWAT team is spelled out for you in images, actions, decisions you make, and in language you hear. Now, we could equally have the same thing about doing science or doing other things that adults do in the world. It's kind of a shame we have an industry that produces really great stuff when it involves violence, but we don't have a lot of people interested in producing worlds for kids to see how things work when they're not about violence.
I learned more about capitalism from the lemonade stand game than any book could ever teach you. You're saying, hey, it's going to be a hot day. I'm going to buy a lot of lemons. I'm going to supply and demand is going to kick in, and I'm going to charge a lot of money for my lemonade. You really learn how the system works.
If you look at a kid, they'll go to bed early when they have problems solving a question on a homework assignment, and they'll stay up late to beat a game level. So how do we get that together? The worst thing a kid will say about a homework assignment is that it's too hard, and the worst thing they'll say about a game is it's too easy. How do we bridge the gap between the two so that what's motivating about games encourage kids to learn?
You know, I think a lot of more sophisticated teachers have learned to appreciate the role of frustration as a very necessary part of the learning experience. But in a lot of times they get heat from, the deans or the principals or the parents or the students saying, little, Johnny is frustrated and that's bad. And the right teacher says, no, that's good. That means that, we will make sure it happens, but that means an aha moment is pretty much imminent, and once that happens, that learning is real.
What you really want to do is find a way to just channel that fun, take the energy that the students are naturally going to bring to any kind of a game project, and then find a way to make that stick. Find a way that afterwards they talk about the game, and you bring out what they learned, and just make sure they remember it.
Teachers have the same problem. They think about, well, are we just going to make everything about education fun, and that sort of devalues the educational process where you want to work hard. We avoid the fun word. We're much more interested in the notion of engagement. That is, when I do a challenging problem set from a homework assignment, I'm engaged. When I read a great novel for a literature class, I'm engaged. When I play a good game, I'm engaged. And when I do my job at MIT, I'm engaged. So engagement is something that we have in common.
We can't have every kid go out and have field trips and experiences, which would be great all the time, but now we can. We can put them into those worlds. And as you said, they're very good for risk-taking, for exploration, and also for thinking about complex systems, because a game, anytime you play a game, it's a rule system, and you have to discover what that rule system is and how to leverage it for your own purposes, and how to even get emergent properties to flow from the rule system. And that is a very modern way of thinking, because we live in a world in which everything we interact with is a complex system.
When we launched the Education Arcade, we really wanted to look at as broad a range of different models for games in education as we possibly could look at. So we looked at everything from games as homework assignments or the equivalent of outside readings, to games as collaborative activities that linked multiple schools together, to games as the equivalent of field trips or an enhancement over field trips, to games as something that is a problem set or a demonstration that's used in the classroom space, to games as an evaluative system as the equivalent of a test problem. So I think all of those are potential functions that games can play in the educational environment.
Based on what these experts have shared with us, there's a lot of promise for the application of video and computer games in education. We'd like to share with you a few specific examples of how this is being done.
One of the prototypes developed by the Education Arcade has been a game that simulates the time period prior to the beginning of the Revolutionary War.
What they've done at the Education Arcade is begin with a commercial off-the-shelf game called Neverwinter Nights that includes tools for modifying the game. MIT has created the game Revolution.
It's a modestly multiplayer game that attempts to model what life in Williamsburg on the eve of the American Revolution would have been like. So students come in, they're townspeople, citizens, slaves, representatives of the royal government. They are involved with day-to-day life. They make stuff because that's part of what you do at Williamsburg, and they're involved in the political debates of the time. So they struggle to make sense of whether they were going to be loyalists or revolutionaries or moderates, and how they're going to deal with the kind of ongoing tension between the UK and the United States.
I know that from my personal experience, I've learned a whole lot about playing games, particularly games based in history.
Revolution is an exciting prototype being developed by a university, but there are already some commercially available games that you could try today.
Muzzy Lane is a company that has created a game that is being marketed directly to the classroom.
In the game Making History, students each control a country in a multiplayer World War II simulation.
The game is a World War II simulation, and it is set up to let students actually be the government leaders of the countries that are the primary role players in World War II. So that's the game that I've used in my classroom, and I'll spend most of the time talking about. It's really the only game that I have used in my classroom. I know other teachers have used games like Civ, Age of Empires possibly, SimCity, some other games like that. But what I found that has been very good about this game is that this game is actually playable and we can get done in the classroom. So the most promising aspects of the game are really student motivation. Students seem to really enjoy the game, enjoy gaming instead of just hitting the books hard. The challenges that I faced are obviously the same types of challenges that I face whether I'm using a game or whether I'm using the textbook. And the challenges are if the student doesn't want to participate or the student is not motivated to participate, it's very difficult to get them into the game. Also, I found that some students that were not what we would call gamers were a little turned off by it from the beginning. And some of them got into the game and some of them did not. But so that's the same type of motivation factor. And also with the Muzzy Lane game, one thing that I have to make sure that students understand is that the game, actually you can change history by playing the game. The World War II does not have to end the same way that it ended in real life.
The World War II simulation brought to us by Muzzy Lane was very educational in that the game didn't just teach us about guns like other video games, but the economics and politics that it takes to run a war. And it was fun and exciting, and some rivalries started. And the whole experience was definitely worthwhile.
The educational value of it obviously has got to be meeting the state standards, which is something that Muzzy Lane did very well. That their game, I know they spent a lot of time making sure their games met state standards, and so when the superintendent or the school board wants to know why we're playing a video game in class, that I can turn to the state standards and I can say it meets these state standards, and we're covering this which is all part of our curriculum.
Muzzy Lane is a pioneering company because they are creating games specifically for the educational market.
While the potential and audience is there, the major game publishers have yet to embrace the idea of creating games that are designed for use in a traditional classroom learning environment.
If you look at the top-selling games of all time, they will include a large number of titles that we would regard as educational titles. Those would include games like SimCity and The Sims, games like Civilization, Age of Empires, flight simulators, various games like Zoo Tycoon, so that those titles have sold extraordinarily well. They simply have not been packaged as educational titles. So the challenge is to get the industry to recognize the potential of this market. So getting in their face every year, bringing top game industry executives and designers in to talk about their visions of educational game, showcasing the work of Will Wright and Sid Meier and Peter Molyneux and others who are important game designers who think deeply about education through their game, is a way of stimulating development in that area. Right now I think that the assumption is the only way to build educational games is through textbook publishers and the whole sort of politics of school adoption. And that slows down the games space. But what we're trying to do is suggest other models of engaging with kids outside the classroom, around the edges of classroom, the development, say, of curricular guides on existing commercial games that teachers could use that would create a secondary market or prolong the lifespan of a game. Models where game industry assets they built for a commercial game and reroute it toward educational games. So there are lots of options there that the games industry could play, but we first got to overcome that hurdle that they think of play as somehow removed from education.
There's a number of obstacles in the way. I don't think that big AAA game publishers really understand that market necessarily. I mean, they're going to go where the money is, and so no one's really shown that you can make an educational product that's going to bring in huge revenues. Another problem is that they're really focused on the high-end, cutting-edge technology.
Parents and teachers get almost instantly why this is valuable. A decade ago, we'd have faced enormous resistance. But the current generation of parents and teachers grew up playing Super Mario Brothers, and now they're ready to accept that technology as having potential cultural value. But the games industry has lagged behind. The games industry has in fact been more resistant to exploring this space. They tend to fear that if they get their technologies labeled as educational, that they're going to turn off the adolescent males who want to play Grand Theft Auto or whatnot on that technology. They want to avoid it the way sugar cereals avoid green vegetables. It's like it's a mix that's really hard for them to accept.
A publisher like Electronic Arts, they're working with the latest next generation consoles. They're working with the most powerful PC hardware that's out there, because that's where sort of the big bucks are. That's where the entertainment dollar is. And when you look at educational institutions, most of them don't have cutting edge hardware. They pretty consistently don't. So you really you have to design your games. Scale back the technology, and so your big publishers and your big hotshot game developers, they're not going to do that. So you almost need a whole separate group of developers and publishers that want to concentrate on that market.
Despite the fact that the major publishers have not yet stepped up to the plate, there's a good deal of hope for the future of games and education, and there are ways that we can advocate for games in the classroom starting today.
Experts agree there needs to be a more sustained effort to educate parents, teachers, and administrators on the power of this medium for student learning and achievement.
We've got to create a demand that the industry will have to respond to. And so that involves a lot of evangelism. It means people like me and other scholars like James G. at Wisconsin and elsewhere going out on the road and talking about the importance of this medium. It involves making educational prototypes that are vivid enough that we can test them in the classroom, get some dramatic results, share them to people, and they can see what an educational game will look like. Because right now, when people think about games, unless they're a gamer, they're either back at Pong and Pac-Man in their mindset, or they're fixated on the violence of Grand Theft Auto and the other sort of controversial first-person shooter titles. They don't have a picture of how rich this medium could be.
I think that in the future things will change, because I think that this generation of teachers grew up on video games. This is the most technologically savvy generation of teachers we've ever had. So I think that they're beginning to see how useful it is. I think that it'll just take a few big software hits before people see that space can be really lucrative, as well as just a great environment to make games for.
That historically, any new media is adopted early by kids who begin to explore its potentials as a way of escaping their parents. Their parents are easily triggered into panic because they aren't familiar with that space. But then the generation that grows up with that technology are much more accepting. They treat it in a more realistic manner, a more pragmatic manner. And so what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years is basically every teacher in America will have had some experience playing games growing up. It will be part of their culture. It's something they understand the way the current generation of teachers understood television, say, or the telephone. As it becomes ubiquitous as a technology in the life of teachers, a lot of the moral panic we've seen after Columbine falls away. A lot of the willingness to explore using that technology in new ways begins to set in. If parallel to that, we've had more and more robust examples from the video games industry that explore what games can do pedagogically, then we have a win-win scenario. To get there, as I said, what we've got to do is begin to develop prototypes that are vivid enough that both the industry, parents, teachers understand the potential of this medium. We've got to persuade people that this is the direction it needs to go. Right now, I think the easiest people to persuade are teachers and parents, the hardest the industry, and we've got to turn that around.
It's a very new technology, and we really have only begun to apply this stuff to science. There's some good stuff coming out in ecology, what games that are called augmented reality, where you use a handheld device that has a GPS in it, and you overlay a fictional world on the real world, so the kid walks around in the real world but maybe is looking for toxic spills. It is also accessing information about them, and to learn ecology or to learn some chemistry or to learn some science. Some of that stuff's worked really well and is quite good. So we're in the beginning stages of this. At the University of Wisconsin, my colleague David Schaefer, who works with our group, builds games that he calls epistemic games, where kids take on the knowledge and practices of some professional, and he's done it with principles from engineering, journalism, ecology. So, for example, kids are journalists. They use technology, game-like technology, to produce professional journalism. They live by those roles. They pick up, they were, in this case, they were science journalists, so they had to learn the science, to interview people, to write about it. He puts them into professional practices. These are middle school kids. You can do it even with the younger kids, so that they pick up skills within a practice that makes sense and one they can actually see and do using some modern technology. The future is going to belong to people who are tech savvy and comfortable with technology, who don't view technical learning as hard or special or different, but view it as an everyday thing. And we're really going to have a lot more kids, including girls, really feel that learning technical stuff is just an everyday, normal encounter.
Thank you for joining us today. We hope we've inspired you to explore these ideas and to experiment with the use of games in education.
For more information on this topic or to hear more of our interviews with Henry Jenkins, James G., and Clark Aldrich, please visit our website at edtech.ocde.us. Join me for a hands-on workshop, Introduction to Games in Education, at the OCDE Tech Center on December 13th. And tune in for our next webcast on the use of iPods in the classroom in November.
For the Orange County Department of Education, I'm Mark Wagner.
And I'm Mike Guerena. Game on.